Welcome to our presentation on Parents as Peer Leaders, a system-informed positive psychology approach to well-being and family quality of life in early childhood. Together, we represent a team of people. So joining us today, I'm Professor Peggy Kern at Melbourne Uni. We have Dr. Anoo Bhopti at Monash University. Kylie Akins is a parent peer leader at Plumtree Children's Services. And Sylvana Mahmic is the Now and Next co-creator and director of Plumtree Children's Services. So we are a community of practice, which includes both researchers and practitioners. And we've brought together our common knowledge and our common interest in order to really approach disability care. And that's what we really want to be sharing with you today. And so with that, we'll dive into our presentation. Over to you, Sylvana.
Thanks, Peggy. As you said, Professor Peggy, we're a broader group of researchers interested in this field. Not everybody's been involved in today's presentation, but just acknowledging those who have been joining us in the past and currently as well. Lovely to see you all. We've used the systems-informed positive psychology perspective as a lens through which we viewed the experiences of parents of young children with disabilities and their families. And here I'm showing you an illustration that summarizes a case study that we worked on through some action research at Plumtree over the last many years. And the research is published. You can find the reference of the peer-reviewed article at the end of this presentation, and that was written with Professor Peggy Kern and Dr. Anik Jansen, who's the co-creator of Now and Next as well. So we critically examined typical approaches to disability supports for families of young children, and we identified the presence of two dominant paradigms, which you can see on the left. Disability is a disadvantage and expert knows best, and families participated in a strengths-based program, which was the origins of Now and Next. This was back in 2015. And Now and Next was influenced and based on systems-informed positive psychology, and it was co-designed with families and continued to be co-designed over many years for improvements and finessing. We did a thematic analysis of the program records and focus groups data and identified the two primary themes once the parents had participated in the program that arose. And these are on the right-hand side of the illustration. And what families got out of the program was that we will start with our strengths and we've got this. So whereas before, as you can see on the bottom, parents were talking about their experiences from the perspective of a deficit focused, assess my child, find the gaps and fix them, tell me what I need to do. And, telling, professionals telling parents, you need to do this. Parents throughout the intervention shifted their perspective, focused on greater wellbeing concepts and practices in their routines and communication with their children, of course, strengths focus. And then this clear shift in their perspectives occurred, which suggests that incorporating a systems-informed positive psychology principles within early intervention approaches provides a potential pathway for shifting the problematic paradigms that dominate disability care and early childhood intervention, which are disability is a disadvantage and expert knows best. And so as you can see, then parents started to shift their thinking and their conversations to, I have a plan, my goals are achievable, I am powerful, I believe in myself, and I have changed as a mother. Over to you, Peggy.
Thanks so much, Sylvana. So in what Sylvana shares, she said that we use the systems-informed positive psychology perspective, and that really, at a theoretical level, is the basis of the work that we're doing and has really been at the heart of our community of practice. This perspective that has brought us together. So the question becomes, what is a SIP, Systems-Informed Positive Psychology, or SIP, perspective? So I work in the area of positive psychology, which really focuses on well-being and resilience in people, what well-being and resilience is, how we can build it, how we can measure it. And interestingly enough, our group can see a lot of intersections between disability care and the need for well-being. The two areas have really developed separately, and so our work is really bringing these together. Now, positive psychology studies things that build well-being, and these include things like strengths. So it's a strengths-based perspective as opposed to a deficit perspective. It thinks about things like relationships and connections with others. And so relationships are critical to our well-being. And when they're going well, they can certainly support our well-being. And when they're going poorly, they can undermine our well-being. There are different interventions that have been developed, such as mindfulness, gratitude, savoring, mindset. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of work that's developed over the past 2 decades, whereas typical psychology really focuses on there's deficit there and we're trying to restore normal functioning. Positive psychology says, well, that's important, but there's more to it. We want to know how to help people not just thrive in life, but to actually really, or not just survive life, but to really thrive in life. And when we think about disability care, the focus typically is on helping people to survive life. So giving supports so that the child with the disability or developmental delay can actually get through life sort of in the normal world, whatever you want to call normal is. And the positive psychology perspective says, well, that's important, but there's more to that. We actually want to be focusing on how young people and their families can actually be thriving despite the challenges that are there. Next slide. And so that's positive psychology. And so we can hear that and we can say, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. Let's put in some of these positive psychology interventions, and that'll lead us to some good well-being outcomes for the child, the family, and the parents. The reality is, however, next slide, is that life is a lot more complicated. And this is true in everyday life for people without disabilities. There's a lot of things that get in the way of our well-being. And even if we have good intentions, there's a lot of things that really work against that. And this becomes even more challenging when we're dealing with disability and developmental delays. Some of that is characteristics of the disease or of the person or of the family. Other things are problems in the systems themselves. And that's one thing that we really saw in that first slide that Sylvana shared, is that there are some really ingrained paradigms, such as experts know best, and we are focusing on deficits. And so they're really ingrained things that add a lot of complexity. So it's not simple to add a positive psychology perspective to disability care. And that's why we suggest that we need what's called a systems-informed positive psychology approach. And that's the work that we've been doing. Next slide. And so from a SIP perspective, what this does is we actually say, we want to embrace that complexity. So instead of ignoring the complexity that's there and just trying to put in these positive interventions, which if we just do it in sort of like the simple way that they've been done with, say, university students in a good university in America, it's a lot more complex than that. We need to be thinking about things like the systems that we're working within, the personalities of the child and the parent, the interactions with caretakers, and many more factors need to come into play. And so SIP really embraces complexity. And this includes complexity in terms of the focus of inquiry. So we're becoming much more focused on going beyond the individual. So positive psychology focused on the individual. In disability care, we really need to be thinking about the child within the family, within the support systems that are there. It's more complex in terms of discipline. So we're moving across disciplines. And so it really started in psychology, but we're seeing things like workplaces, medical care, law, all of these, or government and policy, all of the things that actually affect disability care, we're actually bringing those into the work that we do. Culture, so we are becoming more complex in terms of becoming more multicultural and global. And that's one thing that we've done in our project is we've actually applied the programs and work that we've been doing across cultures and have had some really good success for people with culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And then also, we've been embracing different methodologies. And so typical psychology approaches are very much sort of like you do an experiment, you get results. Well, we use a lot of mixed methods, and so a combination of qualitative and quantitative approaches. Next slide. So summarizing it together, SIP explicitly incorporates aspects of the system sciences into positive psychology theory, methodologies, and discourse to optimize human social systems and individuals within them. Now that's a mouthful, so I just want to point out a few things that characterize SIP that really form the basis of the care that we're giving. Next slide. To begin with, we need to think about what a system is. A system is a set of things interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern of behavior over time. Systems can range from very small in size, so you can think about systems within our body, to very large, such as a country. The elements within a given system dynamically interact with one another, producing a whole that is greater than the sums of the parts. And here we focus on human social systems. And so in this case, we're thinking about the child with disability, the family, the community, the policies and whatnot that are a part of that. Next slide. Central to this is the idea of interconnectedness. And so positive psychology focuses on relationships and the importance of that, and they're crucial to our well-being. But we need to go beyond that. SIP assumes that we are interdependent with others around us. And so my actions have an impact on those that I interact with, and others have an impact on me. And so we have to actually be thinking not only about the child and the parents, but also the interaction between them, not just the parents and the experts, but also how they interact with one another. Next slide. And so I've sort of hinted at this. With a systems perspective, we're not just thinking about the child, we're thinking about the child nested within these other levels, such as the family, peers, teachers, neighbors at one level. At the next level, we're thinking about the school system or the care system, parent workplace, community resources. And at a broader level, we need to be thinking about cultural factors, how much support there is for disability care, economic patterns, how much funding is available, policies, and so policies have a huge impact on the care and have actually reinforced a lot of the patterns that we see, and the environment, and that includes the home environment as well as other care environments. Next slide. Secondly, we need to be thinking about perspectives and looking at things from different perspectives. Different stakeholders may share similar or different perspectives, and a single stakeholder may hold multiple perspectives at the same time. A way to think about this is sort of like we have the elephant here, and there's a parable of an elephant is brought to a community of blind men, and they each touch a different part of the elephant, and they each think that it's something different, and they end up really at odds with each other. And so we can't, and when we think about truth is often coming from a variety of perspectives. And if we only rely on one perspective in disability care, that's often the expert, then we actually miss the perspective of the child, the families, and others in the system. Next slide. Fourthly, we need to be thinking about dynamics. And so the interconnectedness nature of the elements within the system mean that all of our actions interact with other actions that go on. And so you wake up in the morning and how your child is acting impacts upon you. How you respond to that then impacts upon the child. And then we have other things like funding, decisions around care, just the complexities of our day. They're all acting in a very dynamic manner, such that we can't really just say, we do this, we get an outcome, and that's the end of the story. We need to be thinking about the complexities of how disability care actually occurs. Next slide. Finally, we need to be thinking about adaptation and emergence. As systems are constantly changing and evolving, well-functioning systems adapt over time. And one thing that we really believe as a group is that the systems around disability care are broken. They really lead to this perspective that disability is a deficit. Experts know best. And we really think that new paradigms need to emerge from that. Next slide. So the first wave of positive psychology emerged at a point in time where we needed to change from just always focusing on weaknesses and deficits to a focus on strengths. But what we're moving towards is actually embracing the complexity of everyday life. And so this is a perspective where we bring together some of these concepts from the system sciences together with that focus on well-being from positive psychology to affect change. Now, that's a lot of theory. What does that look like in practice? That's what we'll be spending the rest of this on. And so next I turn it over to Anoo to talk a bit about family quality of life.
Thanks, Peggy. Let me get my video going. Yes, so I'll just continue with a tiny bit of theory and then we'll get into practice. So just before we delve into that, so if you're not familiar with the family quality of life model, I just present that to you. This is the work of Anne Turnbull and her colleague Zuna et al. And it's based and embedded in positive psychology. So what is it? So according to this model, individual, as you can see, there's gearboxes. So there's the individual, you'll see there's family level, and then there's a tiny gearboxes, they're the individual member levels. So it's important to understand, we talk about quality of life, but every member of the family has an individual things that impact on their life and their quality of life. And then there are family concepts. So things like family, so these are moderators or mediators altogether on the outcome of the family's quality of life as a whole. So as you can see, it's quite dynamic because it keeps changing. So you can't say I'll have the same family quality of life forever. So it depends on a number of factors. And individual family member factors could be things like age, employment status, or characteristics could be behavior, mental health status. So if a family is going through, a single member is going through certain issues, it impacts everything else. Another important thing is the beliefs and expectations that parents have. So I'm going to refer to parents because I'm kind of unpacking it, looking at the family structure that we work with. Family unit dynamics. So these are direct predictors of the family quality of life. So what goes on within the family? And then there's performance concepts, so something that is delivered or acted upon from outside. So services and supports, for example, early childhood intervention services, or supports that families get from a group or from each other. And then there are practices that people have. So we're all very familiar with a family-centered practice or indicators of family quality of life. So in a system where the families are so dependent on supports and services, these indirect factors, the practices that we show with the families have an indirect impact on family quality of life. Then there are the systems. You can see the dotted lines on this outside of this circle is systems, policies, and programs. So these systemic concepts actually have an indirect mediatory influence on the family's quality of life. So as you can see, whatever happens at the NDIS level has a direct impact on services and supports, and then on the children, and then ultimately on the family quality of life. And the way it works is, what I like about the model, and I chose this one, was it's because of the positive psychology that it's embedded in, it allows us to think that the family in all this dynamic process still keeps going. So the families constantly adapt to the changes that occur following having a child with disabilities. And these adaptations can either challenge or help their family quality of life. So of the things that challenge their family quality of life and what we can do so that we can all together and collaborate and work towards things that are not barriers, but that are facilitators of better family quality of life. And at the bottom of the triangle of that rectangle is that families start gaining new strengths as per the needs, as per the priorities, as per these transitions that they go through. And then it goes back into the family system, and they may not actually continue to work as they were, but they'll become advocates of disability, or they learn new skills and they become empowered, and that has a real positive impact on family quality of life. So that's just the model, and let's keep going. And I will now invite my friend Sylvana to talk about experiences of SIP in disability care.
Thanks, Anoo. Next slide. We're getting practical now. So in this next section, we're having a shift now from the theory, and we're talking about how we have at Plumtree used systems-informed positive psychology at both that macro level that Peggy has talked about in terms of how do we better design a future system that better supports families of children with disabilities and the children themselves in ways that promote their well-being, helping them to flourish. And then what does that look like at a very micro level in terms of, well, what are parents' experiences with elements of the system that they come into contact with, the service delivery, the programs that they experience. So we're going to share a little bit about that through the program that we developed called Now and Next. And then Anoo will talk a little bit about how that has influenced systems-informed positive psychology, has influenced the program that she has developed called We Care. So we're into the practical bit now. Next, so there we go. So we want to, sorry, just before that, we want to empower in early childhood intervention. We do want to empower parents, but at the same time, these two massive paradigms of expert knows best and disability disadvantage and this deficit focus is so predominant in our society that perhaps people aren't even aware of it a lot of the time, how dominant these paradigms are. So we sought to try to influence that with a program that we developed called Now and Next. And if we just go to we developed that in 2015 in Australia. It was co-designed with families of children with disability and continued to be co-designed over the next possibly 4 years. And we've continued to design other modules of it so that there are elements of that program that can be applied to families of school-age children and of course to the young teenagers and young adults themselves. So we're really seeking to influence all ages and stages of how young people with disabilities and their families progress through that age range. So next slide, please. So what we did was we first of all developed a theory of change. And next, thank you, Anoo. And that would guide us, just before that one, thank you. The theory of change, first of all, oops, Anoo, if we could just go back one. So with the theory of change, what we did was we started at the bottom of this illustration that you can see. We looked at the evidence base that we were using. We adopted positive psychology, a systems-informed positive psychology approach, family leadership, strengths-based approaches, gamification, and family-centered practice. They were the fundamental building blocks of what we were trying to do. And then in the middle, you can see three elements on the next three lines. On the right-hand side in green, you can see that in that column, we are looking at families as participants of the Now Next program, participating in that family program, but also other family programs and workshops, and developing an alumni where parents connect with one another to look for multiple opportunities at every point in the system to connect families with other parents. In the middle, we're also then working for this systems-informed positive psych approach to work. We're working, as Peggy said, we're embracing complexity. We've got families themselves. We've got to build up their capacity. As you can see at the very, very top of the illustration, what we're trying to do is build family capability through increasing their participation. So in order to achieve that, we want to work with the family themselves and keep on supporting them through a systems approach to build their family capacity. Then we also are working with family leaders as parent peer workers, and those family leaders and parent peer workers, we're providing parent peer worker training. We're developing and supporting a parent peer workforce within our organisation that complements the role of non-peer professionals. And that has been happening at Plumtree since 2015. It's been a roller coaster ride of an experience, but we've shown that it can be done to incorporate paid parent peer workers and parent leaders within our organisation, and we expect that it will work in other organisations as well and in other places it has. And then, and in the third and final group of people on the left-hand side are the early intervention professionals. If we want to build family capacity through participation, we've also got to help professionals take on a new mindset in many cases and a journey of realising that parent peer workers can be embraced, that they've got a lot of complementary skills to add to the role that they themselves bring as non-peer professionals, and for that to be achieved, there needs to be professional development and communities of practice and building of connections between the peer workforce and the non-peer workforce, so that they're able to really, at a systems level, really move to what we're calling, Peggy and her colleagues have termed in one of their papers, which I think we didn't include in the references, which is called the collective benefit mindset. We want parents as a collective to shift the system, because we have been pushing from the system from the perspective of, well, if we want more family-centered practice, let's train the professionals to do better family-centered practice. And to an extent that has been successful. But what we're saying from a SIP perspective is it hasn't had the desired impact. We're still not where we want to be with family-centered practice, particularly under this current system of the NDIS, which is fighting what we're trying to achieve, and you know, we're in many respects moving backwards from where we want to be as a early childhood intervention sector, and implementing family-centered practice. So what we're saying is, how about we pull another lever, the lever of families as parent peer leaders and parent peer workers, and that, you know, there are lots of different systems, levers in systems, as Peggy describes in her work. And we've tried the family-centered practice lever. We've tried developing parent professionals. We've tried giving more money to the sector of early childhood intervention and disability care through the NDIS. So we've tried many levers, but those levers don't appear to be having as much success as we're hoping. So what we're suggesting here is, why don't we try this to capitalize on this other lever, this untapped network of trained parent leaders, and that we build them as a collective, because then they're actually embracing as a group of parents their empowerment and their understanding that together they're stronger. And so as a research agenda, we've been collecting data on collecting information about pre and post hope, empowerment, well-being, looking at family agency, and we've been publishing since then, and I really am very grateful to all of the professionals and researchers who have been engaged and interested and supporting and a part of this research agenda. Next slide, please. One of the, we're not going to watch this video, so if it does play, we'll just stop it. One of the fundamentals, we believe, in terms of that macro-micro that Peggy was talking about in terms of a systems being, you know, how do we use systems-informed positive psychology at a micro level? We've just talked about the macro level. Well, what we developed was a new way of engaging families' participation in planning. In some research that we did in 2013, we found that, no surprise to many of you, that parents undervalue the role of their themselves in planning, and perhaps don't always see the value of planning. And so we designed a tool, co-designed a tool that is using prospection, and prospection is a positive psychology concept that shows us as individuals how to project what we want to see in the future. So pictability is a tool that we used to help families to be more in charge of their planning, but also to participate and engage in it actively themselves, rather than handing over that agency for the NDIA, for example, to do the planning for them, to help families get their vision for their child and family's future, you know, all sorted so that they can take the concrete steps that they learn through programs such as Now and Next to be able to implement more of themselves. We want parents, as I said at the top of that theory of change, we want parents participating and building their capability through more of their participation at all you know, phases and moments of intervention and engagement with professionals in the community, etc. So that has been very successful, and more about that from the Plumtree website if you're interested. Next slide, please. So we've been collecting data on the Now and Next program and its impact since 2015. But today, my colleague and parent peer worker and peer leader, Kylie Aikens, will be sharing some data from the Parents as Peer Leaders program, which looked at specifically, it was an ILC-funded program. It looked at families who didn't have NDIS funding and engaged them with a parent peer worker and the Now and Next program and pictability visioning. So the data that Kylie's going to share right now is not our full global benchmark, which you can find on our website. It's quite specifically 36 months of this, how we implemented with families who do not have NDIS funding. So thank you. Over to you, Kylie.
Thank you, Sylvana. So on this next slide, you'll see that I'm a parent and I'm trained as a peer worker at Plumtree Children's Services. I am one of the facilitators of the Now Next program, and I have been working on the Parents as Peer Leaders project, as Sylvana said, since it started in those 36 months. I work really closely with another peer worker who's also a parent, Afrose, and she's our operational coordinator. She's also a facilitator of the program and was very key in analysing the data. And apologies that she is unable to join us here today. So the Parents as Peer Leaders project empowered the families of children who were not connected with the NDIS. Even though we did have families who were also there, who had NDIS, this was for those who didn't. And it really empowered them to take charge of their child's development and to really thrive through connecting with our Plumtree's trained parent peer workers that were in our program. The families access different resources that were co-designed, and they learn new skills, and it was all evidence-based throughout the Now Next program's 8 sessions. Many of the families that we spoke with were feeling isolated, and they were really facing challenges in navigating the community or navigating the specialist supports they needed. And although while peer work in early childhood is not quite yet widespread, these families could benefit from connecting with our knowledgeable parent peer workers whose lived experience and insights really provide vital assistance that complemented the work of the non-peer professionals during these early years. As part of the project, I personally got to speak with 1,008 non-NDIS families, as you can see on this slide, and this well and truly exceeded the program's target of 545. And over the phone, we discussed often their child's development, their concerns, their lived experiences, and their challenges in navigating the supports. Plus, they were able to receive guidance and supportive resources from us, including our free video ebooks on support for developmental concerns. So not only was a key component of the project delivering the capacity building Now Next program to these unfounded families, but also setting a vision and positive goals for their entire family. The project also trained and accredited parent peer leaders who became more confident in guiding their families. So you can see here on the slide that we had parent peer leaders that were trained in the actual program and became family leaders. Some parents went on to inspire and support others in the community. They might have done this through joining other parent peer-led organisations. An example of this might be Kindred online, or different groups such as now My Time groups, but really amplifying the program's impact far beyond the initial scope of what the program was for. On the next slide now, we'll talk about the project significantly helped the most vulnerable families, these non-NDIS families who may not be able to have access funding. They had lower baseline levels of hope, empowerment, and wellbeing compared to other Now Next families as measured by our benchmark data and confirmed by our parent peer facilitators. Throughout the project, we collected data and measured outcomes from start to finish, and we measured hope, empowerment, wellbeing, and goal attainment. As you can see by this slide here, there is an increase in all of these key areas. And not only are these encouraging outcomes measured, however, they also are evident to the facilitators in the groups that we're facilitating, because through those group reflections together, they could see that there was an increase. The non-NDIS parents also had a higher no-show rate, which was quite interesting. So they had a higher no-show rate for session 1, and also a lower completion rate. But despite the challenges, the families achieve much larger increases in outcomes measured than the Now Next benchmark. And although their final levels were below this, the outcomes suggest that non-NDIS families, although facing greater barriers, ultimately benefited from the Now Next program with significant capacity and gains. A model for future foundational supports, this project exceeded objectives and demonstrated the power of peer-led approach in empowering families of children with and without NDIS funding. New skills and strengthened agency in the families enabled them to better navigate the complex systems and landscape around them, and to access the specialists and community support systems. The program really presents a valuable model for our future foundational support initiatives. And our next slide. So some of the feedback that we had from some of the participants was that one parent said, "It has given me tools to simplify things such as goals and the steps to achieve them, and takes away the overwhelm to make them happen. Now Annex has highlighted ways that we can focus on our strengths and what we already have to help with challenging situations. I think more than anything, it's given me hope for the future. Prior to doing this program, I was feeling quite despondent about parenting and issues I was facing. I don't really have a lot of people I can talk about these things, and spending time with you all and sharing has been invaluable to me. The course has been extremely beneficial for me, my mental health, well-being, and as a result has influenced me to parent and advocate for my child better. It has also given me the ability to take a step back in my personal relationships and access things from different angles and viewpoints. So these are things that we saw as facilitators and trained parent peer leaders, but there were also things that we had experienced as parent facilitators ourselves. I'm now going to hand you over back to Anoo, and she's going to share some more. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. So I'm just going to go quickly into We Care, which is our other program, which is also embedded in systems-informed positive psychology. And it is, we're collecting evidence still, but it is evidence-informed and professional-led, but fully peer-supported, peer-facilitated, and co-designed. So our main objectives of We Care are to build confidence, competence, and family life. And of course, there are many ways in achieving that through the program. I won't go into all the details. You know this picture now. This is what I showed you at the start. But here again, it kind of helped. This was that helped us understand what are some of the factors. This was postdoctoral research that showed us that the time of diagnosis is something that's challenging family quality of life. And based on that, we designed the program to help families around the time of diagnosis, because we know that that's a very crucial time for families to lose their quality of life and bonding as a family. So the We Care was based on family quality of life and well-being, as well as we looked at parent occupations. So because my background is occupational therapy, I'm very interested in finding out what happens to parents and families in their everyday occupation. So I used a categorization that we continue to use in We Care, which kind of looks at your daily schedule or your weekly schedule in terms of committed things that you do. So things that you're committed to but don't get paid for, like looking after your children, cleaning, cooking, etc. Necessary things that are physiological that you need to do for your body, like eating, sleeping. Contracted, so things you get paid for, and study and stuff like that. And then free time is time that is left over in which you do things that you really, really like to do, like have a coffee with a friend and things like that. So we share this diagram and this categorization with the families in We Care, and helping them understand and balance out, because it is a dynamic balance, quality of life, and making them aware of the loss of these previous occupations that they used to engage in, find their identity, and redevelop their well-being and sense of being a parent. And then we know that side by side with knowledge and empowerment, because at that stage in their journey, they're fixated on how can I help my child best, because that's their goal. Is I just need to know what to do. I've just got a diagnosis, completely not what we wanted in our life. So that's where they're probably not always ready to hear this, but every parent down the track has told us that it was good that you introduced us to this model. So we continue to show that. This is just very quickly, we did a quant and a qual study. And firstly, we find out the reaction to diagnosis from parents. And as you can see, a lot of them feel a sense of worry and overwhelm. But there's also relief that they feel after receiving a diagnosis. And they feel all these, mixed feelings. And this is another graph, which I won't go into too much detail, but yes, you can see the tall buildings there. That is the amount of time that they spend on committed occupations, so looking after their children and doing things. And the least amount of time is on free time occupations. So this is the graph that tells us that that's what happens. And we did a pre and post with our group, and we asked them the value of the group and what are the things that were most helpful. And as you can see, most of the families said that meeting other parents and parent support workers was really helpful. Getting understanding of the diagnosis was really helpful. And of course, the parent occupation well-being theory, they found that helpful. So we do share the family quality of life theory with them so that it gives them more understanding of what their family quality of life should look like, or what happens when you have a new diagnosis. So we also did a qualitative study, and here are some quotes from families that actually encourages us to reflect a little bit more about how we actually live our daily lives, because this is such a long, long journey. So we've got to have enough through. They go above and beyond. Hearing what other people do really helped me in terms of helping us to refocus and re-centralize stuff that we do. So we had mothers and dads in our groups. So that's just briefly, and I might invite Peggy to start talking a little bit more about the implications of systems-informed positive psychology and key takeaways. Peggy.
Thanks, Anoo. So we started with the theory of SIP as a framework, where we're really focusing on a positive psychology perspective, but we're also bringing in the complexity that's required from a systems perspective. And there are different elements within that that are useful. What we see is Now and Next and We Care are both built upon SIP principles. And we have, as shared by my colleagues, they actually are having a really big impact on the families. And in an area where people often feel disempowered, hopeless, and low levels of well-being, we see that in our research. What we see is this alternative perspective can actually empower people. It can lead to a higher quality of life. It can add to a sense of hope and well-being. And so, while it adds in complexity, a SIP perspective is a useful framework for disability care.
Thanks, Peggy. What we've shown is that from the field, we have taken SIP as a theoretical construct, but we've shown it as a proof of concept at Plumtree. And in an in-print chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Positive Psychology and Disability, we've presented this as a case study, what we've done with Now and Next program, and shifting our sector through the using the lever, pulling the lever of parent peer leaders and parent peer work to increase hope, empowerment, well-being, agency, and ultimately the autonomy, the participation of families. So we've demonstrated over the last decade that it's not just a concept, it's actually got practical implications. And over the last decade, we have shown that it is a proof of concept, and look forward to sharing that chapter with you. But today's explanation was just a little bit of highlight of that. Over to you, Anoo.
Yes, so the other implications for us to take forwards are to be mindful of family quality of life and parent occupations as outcomes. So when you work with families, do not forget that these are important outcomes, and they're really your services and supports for families need to really think about and be mindful of measuring these outcomes. And I'll keep going into the limitations. So Peggy, could you start with that one?
Yeah, so of course, any approach that we take is going to have different limitations and different constraints. I think the biggest challenge of our approach is that SIP does emphasize complexity. And oftentimes when we're in a care situation, we actually want just a simple solution. And you know, I just want the medical expert to just say, do this, you'll have a good outcome. And that's nice, but that's not realistic. And so, but the complexity can be overwhelming. And so what we need to do is break down that complexity into manageable steps. And that's where something like the Pictability tool, the work that's done in We Care, this is actually using that framework, but making it tangible in a way that has an impact on those that are involved in the program. So that complexity can be a limitation, but it's actually the thing that can actually spur us to having the biggest impact on family quality of life and well-being.
Thanks, Peggy. I guess in terms of a limitation, one of the limitations we've found is the funding landscape. Under the Parents as Peer Leaders program, we've received funding from the ILC to provide the connection to peer support, the resources, the Now and Next program, the Pictability planning for free to families whose children didn't have NDIS funding. What we noticed was that during that same period, families who did have NDIS funding could enroll, but they had to pay using their NDIS funding. And in a 6-month period in 2023, 20 families paid for the program using their NDIS funding. But what Plumtree thought to do was, let's sponsor the NDIS families for a period of 6 months and see what happens. And you would not be surprised to learn that during 2024, in the same 6-month period, instead of 20 families who had NDIS paying for the program, 140 families who had NDIS program enrolled because it was free. After that sponsorship was announced, that's a 600% increase. So it shows that it is important to offer parent capacity building programs free of charge to families, regardless of their funding status in Australia under their NDIS, because we want families to avoid competing with their child's NDIS therapy funding. And all of you who are on the ground would understand how protective families are of their funding and want to direct it predominantly to therapy. And that little case study there really gives us some food for thought to think about how we go into the future and where programs such as We Care and Now and Next are funded, so that parents do not have to compete with their funding and therapy. That's a horrible decision for a choice for families to have to make. So we think that should be sorted out in the future.
Yes, thanks. And that happens to We Care as well. So as long as I had funding, we had families attending. It is really hard for families to choose over their child's care, because that's where they are in the journey. And the last point is ruinous empathy. That I really love that point that my colleague Anoo talked about. And when I looked more into it, this is something that professionals do, is in their real valuable way in which they support families. They are very empathic. So they'll say things like, oh, they're not ready for this program yet. So they make decisions. And that empathy, which is the root is from really a place of care, can be ruinous to families, because that means they've lost the opportunity to actually have access. So it's important to remember that, yes, we may think a family is not ready, but it's still within our responsibility to at least let them know and provide them the knowledge about that. So here we go. So yes, so with that, I think here are some of our websites that you can go and look at. And here is a list of references, which we hope that keeps growing. And this is our contact. You would like to contact us. And I'm just conscious of time. We have about 8 minutes, but we're really happy to have question and answers, or you can use the chat to ask us any questions in the last 8 minutes. Yeah, you can unmute yourselves, and this is a good time. And yes, there is something in the chat.
Okay, so one question was, are we advocating for these programs to be included as a national resource for all families under the foundational supports reform? And really, whether it's these programs or programs like this, that is what we're advocating for, is that we do actually need to have parent-led programs. We need to have this positive psychology perspective with family quality of life at the core of that. Sylvana and Anoo could speak more to that from a practical perspective.
Yes, we are advocating for such capacity building programs that have used a systems-informed positive psychology approach, because parenting programs, just, if they're still rooted in a deficits medicalized expert-driven approach, are not what we're really advocating for here. We're really advocating for contemporary approaches that use have family well-being at heart and use SIP as a foundation.
And the next question is, yes, the parent as peer leaders in both the programs, our parents are paid. So that's just a quick answer to that one, unless you want to elaborate. What can we do to support this approach?
It's a good question. Oh gosh, I think, look, Now and Next is, and We Care have been co-designed in Australia, and we've really taken into account Australian circumstances and the environment. I think keep talking about these programs amongst your team and with your families and other similar programs, so that, as Anoo said, with professionals, and with our theory of change, we also have to recognize that not every professional working in our field has understood or embraced some of the concepts that we've been talking about today. So please keep talking about it and advocating for them.
Yes, I think Kate B has a question whether our research is mentioned on the websites and outcomes frameworks. So Peggy, your framework's on your website, isn't it?
Yeah, so talking more about SIP is on my website. I'll also put under there's a publications tab that has all of our publications. So we do make those freely available, because I know sometimes there can be paywalls and whatnot, but we do make those resources available.
Anita's got a question. How do we access to Now and Next and we can get trained? So
Yeah,
you want to
contact us. Yeah,
Yes,
contact
just
us.
contact us, Anita. Yep, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
Then we have, thank you, Suzanne. Wondering if these resources are accessible for deaf families or carers, parents with disabilities, and Auslan interpreters.
Suzanne, reach out to us via email. I know that I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure you would too, Anoo. That is a great question
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, and again, not yet available. Are you sharing your research expertise with others? Yes.
Just on Suzanne's point, Kylie and our parent peer workers, in talking to 1,008 families, I don't think there was any family, Kylie, that reached out to you who had a hearing impairment. That could have been perhaps that we didn't have the right connections with the advocacy groups and the parent-led groups, but we did have parents who identified as being autistic, and who disclosed that to the peer facilitators. So there were parents who had disabilities themselves, who accessed the programs, but not who identified as being deaf. So love to talk to you, Suzanne.
Abby, you asked whether the programs are delivered online. So We Care is 3 sessions and all 3 are delivered online. And Now and Next, Sylvana?
8 sessions, all online. So since we used to do face-to-face prior to COVID, but then due to actually prior to COVID, we actually tested a telehealth option, a telepractice option, and the results were very similar to the outcomes via face-to-face. So we'd done that as a pilot before COVID hit. Fortunately, when COVID arrived on the scene, we shifted completely to online, and the consequence of that has been incredible in terms of increased accessibility by parents who've told, parents, Kylie will attest, parents are lying in bed with 3 children, they're doing dinner, they're in hospital waiting rooms, they've gone, they're at airports, some are, overseas for a session, they're joining from overseas. So the increased accessibility has been incredible since moving completely online.
Yes, and we started We Care face-to-face, and we only had 1 session, which was end of 2019. And then, of course, COVID hit us. And so we've gone online, and it's been really helpful, for same as Sylvana. We have families doing stuff.
regional, very remote. So our percentages are in terms of across Australia, the proportion of regional, rural and very remote align with the ABS statistics. And we believe that that's a consequence of families from those regions being able to join online. Of course, there are parents who do not have access to digital literacy and access to the internet in some of those areas. We recognise that. However, what we have seen through our data collection is that we are hitting the mark in terms of the ABS statistics.
Thanks, Paul. And Paul says that it can be very difficult supporting some practitioners to understand and embrace the concepts of peer workers as valued contributors.
Paul, shout out to your work. For those of you who know Paul, you will know the amazing work that he is doing through his past employment and his current employment in working with parent-led parenting programs through, I think it is EPIC, is it?